In today's video, we'll be discussing how you can create your own dark fantasy, manga, comic, or light novel. Let's get straight into the video. So first of all, when you're creating a dark fantasy, manga or novel, the first thing you want to do is craft challenging goals with a dire consequence if your character fails in their goals. This is one of the main differences between a regular fantasy and a dark fantasy. In fantasy, your characters will likely make many decisions over the course of the book, and some of them may lead to difficult consequences and others might lead them in a good direction. But in a dark fantasy, almost all of the choices they have will lead to some kind of difficult consequence that your character needs to face and get through in order to move forward in the story. So as you are creating your character's main goals in the book, consider what goal they must fulfill and what consequence may occur if your character fails. In this way, you make that goal way more important and make it more interesting as your character goes towards fulfilling that goal. In this way, your character will continue to push forward in the story even when it seems impossible because they refuse to let themselves fail. Through the manga pages, create moments where your character might reminisce on past events as they are considering their actions. Reveal moments where their willpower to succeed is shown through their body language. There should be many different times in your manga or light novel where your character is faced with difficult events and they need to use all of their willpower and have a goal that motivates them enough to keep them moving forward even when things seem impossible. You also want to develop a likable cast of characters. In a dark fantasy, things are bound to happen to your characters eventually, and so when difficult things do happen, you need to ensure that your audience cares enough about your characters for them to worry about these characters and not want these difficult events to happen to them. To make a likable cast of characters, you can make them interesting to read about, make them entertaining, or give them a unique perspective on the world that makes them stand out. In some cases as well, if you're creating more of a villainous character, you could make them really good at strategy and coming up with interesting plans, and this makes them interesting to read about, which in turn makes them likable as a character. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be good or bad, they just need to be a character that your audience will want to continue to read more about. Give them unique designs that feel believable in your world. If your character needs to survive in a dark fantasy landscape, they may have specific armor or unique magical weaponry that can help them on their quest. Build a unique power system which supports the story. In a dark fantasy, the power system is also really important. A key feature to writing that good dark fantasy is to consider what kinds of abilities your characters have and how they may use those abilities in your story. Throughout the book, they may need to use the powers they have in unique ways. Usually dark fantasy will include some form of magic use, so you need to consider how they may use those powers and abilities to support them in the story. Try and consider the different categories of powers and the abilities. Consider the origin of those powers and how those abilities may look when your character uses those abilities. Also understand that in some cases your book may be more, for example, medieval themed and feature characters using physical weapons such as swords, and so in this case you may not need a power system. Just consider what kinds of abilities your character has in your book and how you can craft a power system that best suits the abilities that your character has. Also create a limit to their powers or a consequence for using them. In a dark fantasy, it's all about the consequences behind the actions. If a character fails during their quest, it will likely lead to some kind of dire result, and this is no exception when it comes to the power system. Consider the limitations to their powers. Every time they use their magical abilities, there should be some kind of consequence behind them doing this. For example, if they use their powers for a certain amount of time or in a certain location, or they may need a certain magical object in order to use those abilities. You need to consider what limitations your characters have in their abilities and how those limitations may cause them to need to make certain decisions in your book. This is another key difference between fantasy and dark fantasy. In fantasy, there'll be less consequences or limitations behind the abilities, but in dark fantasy, it's all about those limitations and, more importantly, how your character uses those limitations in order to better use their powers in the story. You also need to understand the consequences as well. When your character uses their abilities, there may be some kind of negative result also. If they use their abilities a lot, they may feel weakened or gain some kind of magical ailment. This also applies if you're having characters with physical abilities too. A weapon might be heavy and it could only be wielded by a certain character. A character may need to spend a long time training in order to use certain weapons or physical fighting techniques. Just consider your character's abilities and what kinds of limitations or weaknesses you could give them that could make it more interesting when they do use those abilities in your story. Establish a detailed world which your characters must explore. Another key feature to dark fantasy is there'll usually be a really in-depth world that your characters need to explore. Create a main goal that forces your characters to traverse the world you have created. The goal should ensure that they don't stay in the same place for too long. The goal may mean that they need to locate a certain magical character, they may need to find a magical object or many magical objects, or they may need to go to different places and discover something new in every location. They may simply be a wanderer finding new quests to go on their travels. Just think about how you can encourage your characters to cross this world you have created, and you may even want to develop a world map to help you better understand that world and what kinds of important locations you want to present over the course of your story. Also create unique dangers in your world. As your character goes on their quest, create unique dangers that they need to face. This might come in the form of unique monsters, dangerous plants, or challenging terrain that your characters will need to get through in order to get to where they need to go. This is why it's really helpful to craft a world first and then think about what unique dangers exist in that world. When drawing the illustrations, take some time to brainstorm and sketch these elements. This is another really important part of dark fantasy. The world will be dangerous and your character will likely have to face many difficult events over the course of their journey. So ensure that in your character's quest, you give them dangers that they will need to traverse, and that can make it way more interesting to see how your character gets through those situations and continues on their journey. Build an antagonist who brings fear to your characters. In dark fantasy, the antagonist is usually a character or a thing that also causes a lot of obstacles on your character's journey. But understand that the antagonist doesn't always need to be a character. The antagonist could be a difficult villain character, or it could simply be a different obstacle that is stopping your characters in their quest. It could be your character's own fears, it could be a bad magical object in the world, or it could be a certain situation that keeps coming up in your character's journey. Just understand that the antagonist in the book is the obstacle that is stopping your character from achieving their goals. It does not necessarily need to be a character, but it can be. So think about whether it works better to have an antagonist as a character or an antagonist in some other way in your dark fantasy. And make sure that this antagonist is really difficult for your characters to defeat. Your characters will need to use all of their training, willpower, and strength in order to get through this difficult situation and fight against this antagonist. When your character fails, give them a strong reason to stand again. The goal needs to be so important to your character that they will keep moving forward even when things seem impossible. It needs to be important enough that they will traverse this dangerous world or face these really dangerous monsters or situations in order to achieve what they have set out to accomplish. So from the very beginning, ensure that you give your character a really important goal that is important to them and a strong motivation behind that goal. And in a dark fantasy, no matter how dark or dangerous this world will be, the goal needs to be enough to keep your character moving forward and feeling determined to face those dangers no matter what. When your character gains something, they should also lose something. Unfortunately, in a dark fantasy, there will always be a consequence or a loss even when your character does manage to succeed. So when your character succeeds in your story, think about what is also lost. Maybe your character had to use all of their magical strength in order to get through a dangerous battle, and now they feel really weakened, or they may even lose their magical abilities in some way. They may be wanting to gain a new magical object or powers, but they may need to also give up a personal important item that is really special to them. So just think about when your character is gaining something in your dark fantasy book. Also consider what they may lose as a consequence to this and how they may feel when those events happen. In order for your character to level up in a certain way or find a magical object or do the goal that they have set out to do, they may need to give up certain things or lose something that is of importance to them in order to get to where they need to be. And when those events happen, you need to think about how your character feels and how those emotions can be shown in your manga or light novel. Thank you so much for watching my video today, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what kind of dark fantasy, manga, comic, or light novel you're creating, because I would love to hear about it. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!